So we're going to learn from this week's Parsha. We're going to learn about communication. After all, as human beings in Hebrew, we are called medaber. Medaber means communicators. What makes us very unique from the rest of creation is the fact that we can communicate. Animals communicate, but they only communicate insofar as fulfilling their needs, shall we say. And perhaps that's what happens with children when they're first born, right? Child cries because they have needs, they can't express it. Then they learn how to express, and all they can do is express their needs. But then as we mature and we grow, we're capable of expressing deeper feelings that are not just about my needs necessarily, it could be about my needs, but about how I can connect with another. Or ideas even greater than that, than our emotional needs, is our ideas about things. And that have great value to us, we're able to communicate them. And when we effectively communicate, we can make an impact, a great impact. Now, of course, there's the other side of things, that if our words can make a great impact, they can also do quite the opposite. They can also create a lot of discord. They can create a lot of pain and suffering in other people. So this is what we want to touch upon today, that in interpersonal relations, words matter. And how do we deal with this from a Torah point of view? Now, when we look at the Torah portion, quite often we're taken by the big picture, by the great, storyline. And rightfully so, because after all, that seems to be in our face. So in this week's Parsha, Parsha Noach, it speaks about the great flood. And of course, that raging waters that came from above and came from below and took the world, literally flooded the entire world, except for Noach and his family, is of course what is very a vital message, an important message. But that's the one that's there right in our face. But since Torah is to be learned from every part, because the word Torah means Horah, so every part of the Torah is to be a lesson. So those things that are more subtle, that are not in your face, that you may not recognize and may be overlooked, are just as important a lesson in life that we need to examine. So when we come to communication, now, of course, even there's also primary things that are very obvious. Like, we're all familiar with the term lashon hara, speaking ill of another. Speaking ill of another, even if it's true, that we're familiar with. We're familiar. Torah speaks about slander. Slander meaning saying things that are not true about another. Again, those things are very obvious and prominent, and they're in your face. But there are other things, other potentially adverse forms of speech that we're going to speak about in this class. It's not so obvious. It's not in your face. And we'll discover how important they are, how they need to be dealt with, regulated. And even when there isn't any overt, seemingly disqualification or prohibition, negativity, yet Torah has an attitude on how those words needs to be expressed. So let's start at the beginning of the story. We're all familiar. A corrupt society. At the end of last week's Parsha, that the Almighty says their time has come to an end. And he finds a righteous man by the name of Noach, tells him to build a ark. And in that ark, he will bring his family, as we mentioned, but also of the animal kingdom. And from the animal kingdom, he will bring exactly as God instructs. So I'm going to go and share the screen. With some of the teachings here. Oops. All right. Text 1a. Can everybody see it? Yeah, thumbs up? All right, good. So, what does it say? And God said to Noah, come into the ark, you and all of your household, for it is you that I have seen as a righteous man before me in this generation. Of all of the pure animals, you shall take for yourselves 7 pairs, a male and its mate. And of the animals that are not pure, 2, a male and its mate. Also of the fowl of the heavens, 7 pairs, male and female, to keep seed alive on the face of the earth. Now, we've all seen, we've all seen the story, whether some kind of biblical caricature of it. 2 by 2 they came, filing into Noah's Ark. But what do we have over here? Not just 2 by 2, 7 by 7. What is the distinction? As Rashi explains, that of all the pure animals, next reading, that are destined to be clean for Israel, we learn from here that Noah studied the Torah, 7 pairs, so that he might offer up some as a sacrifice upon leaving the ark. So the non-kosher animals were 2 by 2. The kosher animals were 7 by 7. Why? Because he's going to bring offerings as a thanksgiving to God Almighty, as to be spared, and not only to be spared, but to be the chosen individual who will propagate the entire universe through his descendants. By the way, just parenthetically, we see how insightful over here is the insight rather that we have from over here is how important offerings to God are. Very important, so much so that Noah brings them onto the ark. But that's not the point that we want to bring out over here. Let's take a close look at the wording over here. That's what's really important. So let's take a look at the words over here. Of all the pure animals, you shall take for yourself 7 pairs. And of all the animals that are not pure. So in Hebrew, for those who are familiar with Hebrew, the word is tahor, for pure. And what he says, what the verse says rather, is asher ina tahira, which is not pure. So what is important for us over here is the fact that the verse does not say the word tameh. Tameh means impure. Could have just said very simply, those that are pure are 7 pairs. Those that are impure are 2. Why is it that the verse says over here, asher einene tahora, that they are not pure? Now, just to contrast this, if we go into the book of Leviticus, Vayikra, and what does it say over there? When it's speaking about pure and impure animals, but these you shall not eat among those that bring up the cud and those who have cloven hoof, the camel, because it brings up its cud, but does not have a completely cloven hoof. It is unclean. The term there in Hebrew, tameh. It doesn't say not pure. It says tameh, unclean. And the hyrax, because it brings up its cud, but will not have a completely cloven hoof, it is again tame, unclean. And it continues right further. So the simple question is, if we look throughout the Torah, generally the term that's used when it's speaking about an animal that's not kosher is the word tame, impure. But in our reference, in our parsha, the non-kosher animal is referred to as asher einena tahira in Hebrew, which is not pure, instead of the regular word tame, impure. So the obvious question is why? Why the distinction? Why in our Torah portion, when it's speaking of a non-kosher animal, it's giving us a negative definition. In other words, it's telling us what it's not. It's not it's not pure. Well, tell us what it is. What is it? It's impure, right? Simply. In other words, why a long-winded way to describe with extra words when you can be more concise? As we know in Torah, to be brief and to be clear is very important. Those are two important considerations. This is not a question of semantics over here. This is not an issue of semantics. This is very important in Torah teachings. In other words, if you're not a believer that Torah is God's word, okay. So here it spoke this way, over there it spoke that way. You know what? Because after all, that's the way humans are. Humans misspeak. They're not precise in every time that they communicate and say it the exact same way. Big deal. But if you believe the Torah is the God-given word, so therefore being precise, being brief, and speaking with clarity is of utmost importance. And in our Torah portion, it's not. There's an extra 8 letters that are added in the very fact that we are saying the term asher einena tahira, that is not pure, as opposed to very simply saying tame, impure, clear and brief. Now, just to give context to this, how important every single letter is in the Torah, let alone words, how important. We learn so much from Jewish law from a single nuance of a letter, and not just a letter. There are certain letters that have crowns upon them, and those crowns, select letters, decorated crowns, are not there for just decoration. As the Talmud tells us, that when Moshe Rabbeinu ascended the mountain and God showed him future generations, he showed him Rabbi Akiva, he was expounding the crowns on the letters. And he asked him, what's going on over here? Is this something I don't know about? No. It's something that's a part of your Torah. Absolutely. But it will be revealed, this element, this teachings, and generations to come by Rabbi Akiva, that he's going to derive many teachings from not even just the letters, but the crowns upon the letters, mounds and mounds of Jewish law. Now, there's Jewish law is there, but where do you derive it from? How do you learn it out? Even from the crown. Now, if that's the case, a letter is even more important than a crown, because if you're missing a crown in the Torah, it doesn't invalidate the Torah. Missing a letter, that's a different story. Missing a word, that's a different story. So here the Torah is adding 8 extra letters, and it's not being precise. It's not being clear. Obviously, there has to be an important meaning over here. You know, today's Rosh Chodesh, and our regular Torah reader was not in shul. So guess what? I had to read from the Torah. And I was prepared somewhat because I've done it before. But that being said, if you ever, I'm sure all of us have been there in shul where the Torah reader is all of a sudden, abruptly interrupted because didn't pronounce a word properly. What's the big deal? Come on, get a life. So you didn't pronounce the word properly. Well, yeah, That's how precise we are, that not only is a Torah, if one letter is missing, the entire Torah is invalidated, it has to be fixed. I mean, it can be fixed. It's invalidated in the sense that you can't read from it one letter. But even when it's pronounced improperly, the Torah reader is interrupted and told how to say it appropriately. That's how precise we need to be. So, of course, there's no mistake over here. God didn't, accidentally express something in an invalid way, as we will see. There's nothing extra in Torah. All right. So now let us revisit our particular story. What is the lesson that needs to be gleaned from the fact that in our Parsha, as opposed to, I think it's over 100 places in the Torah that says the word Tameh, in our Parsha, it says, Asher Einena Tahara, that it is not pure. So the Talmud in Tractate Psochim tells us the following. Here we go. From the Tractate Psochim, as we said, as Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said, a person should never express a crude matter, as the formulation of the verse was distorted by an addition of 8 letters, rather than express a crude matter, as it is stated, of all the pure animals and of all the animals that are not pure. So what do we learn over here? Unbelievable. Imagine. This is a story about the flood. When you think about it, like, wow, here's a story of stories. Destruction of all of humanity. There's only going to be one family left. They're going to be the progenitor for all future generations. And in the middle of that, there's a little nuance in the story. The Torah is coming to teach us a valuable lesson about how to communicate with our language. And what is that? That it's not enough that if we have something that is important to say, but it can't be said in a crude way. It needs to be said in a refined way. Therefore, the Torah overrides the fact that there should be a clarity here. What's the clarity? Saying impure. In order to teach us a lesson, that you have to be careful in the usage of your words, that it should be in a refined manner. It shouldn't be derogatory. So I'm going to throw this out to you now. Doesn't that itself now beget a question? Anybody? Okay, we get it. Our Torah portion, right? It went around in order, added extra 8 letters to teach us an important lesson. When we speak, we need to have a refined manner of expressing ourselves. It's not sufficient to say something that is meaningful. It's not sufficient to say the truth. It needs to be refined. We'll get to that in detail more. But then on the other hand, then we have another question. All right, we understand our Parsha. What is going on with the 100+ places in the Torah where it actually uses the word? Maybe I shouldn't use it, right? Because the Torah does. Tameh, impure. So you might say, well, maybe in just one instance is sufficient to teach us the lesson. No, but if that's the lesson, then the Torah should follow suit and follow and fulfill the lesson itself. Seems like, I did it once, and the other times, I do differently. So there seems to be something inconsistent. The Rebbe himself asks this question, that this is extremely puzzling, that the term tameh, impure, can be found in the Torah more than 100 times. So it wouldn't be far more sensible for the Talmud to question this term that is repeated so many times. So we will get there. But the question's clear now? Yeah? Anybody? Thumbs up? All right. Wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful. Let's just see online if anybody has... All right. So what we need to first do is to examine Torah's approach to speech, to communication. And the balance between actually refined speech, truth, and truth in speech, as opposed to falsehood, right? Now, living in Western civilization here in Canada and in America and in other places, freedom of speech, right? So it's in the Constitution, the Canadian Constitution, the American Constitution, but the truth is it predates far, far before us, even in Athens, in the democracy there in the 5th century before the Common Era. The issue of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, was something that was relevant, prevalent, was a discussion. And of course, now in Western civilization, it is the cornerstone of so much discussion and debate today. Now, even though there is freedom of speech, of course, there is limitations to that. You can't go into a theater. Actually, I don't think you can go into a theater today. Not here in Quebec, at least. You can't go into a theater. Right? But you can't go into a place that social distancing of many people, or back in the day, if you remember, before there wasn't social distancing, if you recall such a thing, and scream out fire when there's no fire. Of course, there's repercussions for that. You're held responsible for such actions. In other words, we're not free to just say anything that we want, right? Likewise, if we're doing something that is hurtful to another, painful to another, a lie or a slander about another. So those things in society that we live, there is limitations. And then, of course, there is political correctness. I guess it depends on what side of the aisle you are politically, then that will decide what is correct and incorrect, right? So there's room for debate on this, that we're not going to really go there so much, but we need to know, what does Torah have to say about this? Now, as we mentioned before, of course, when it comes to Lashon Hara, to speaking ill of another, right? So in Leviticus, it says very clearly, you shall not wrong one man, his fellow, and you shall fear the Lord your God, for I am the Lord your God. This mitzvah has parameters. In the end, you have to fear the Lord your God. You know why? Because are you going to cross that line or not? Speaking ill of another, having a lack of sensitivity towards another. So, for example, if someone is asked a scholarly question that they should not say to one who is not versed in that field, right? Let's say you have a scholarly question, and this person's not versed in that field. And you say to the person, no, so what do you have to say about this question? Yeah, what do you have to say about this law in Judaism? Right? What's your opinion on this matter? You're not allowed to do that because that person's not scholarly. They don't know. And maybe you're embarrassing them. That's called refinement. That's called a refinement in how we act to another. Now, that's clearly stated in the Torah. That's called oinoah, having that sensitivity. In modern society, we're not overly concerned with that, because freedom of speech, I can say whatever I want. But Torah stresses that we need to have the compassion and sensitivity, and that overrides other considerations. In addition to the prohibition of lashon hara, speaking ill about another, there's also about lying and falsehood. As it says very clearly in the book of Exodus, distance yourself from a false matter and do not kill a truly innocent person or one who has been declared innocent, for I will not vindicate a guilty person. So this prohibition leads us to an interesting question. What's the interesting question? Well, if I'm not allowed to lie, I have to distance myself from lying. Well, then how about when that truth is going to hurt somebody? How do I deal with that? Do I have to tell my beliefs, what I think of you? Is that appropriate? So where do we draw the line with this? In other words, in today's world, people say, be open, be real, tell it like it is, even if it might be hurtful. That's not necessarily a Jewish ideal. Actually, it's not at all a Jewish ideal. The ultimate ideal is, yes, we need to be truthful, but being that it could be hurtful, we need to be able to weigh the two things. We shouldn't water down our convictions and what our beliefs are, but at the same time, we need to be careful. As the saying goes from the Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe writes, it is forbidden to utter falsehood. Truth, on the other hand, need not be broadcasted and publicized from the rooftops. Right? So yes, falsehood needs to be, we need to distance ourselves, but that doesn't mean that we have to stir up controversy. That doesn't mean that we have to say the truth. We don't have to broadcast it. We need diplomacy. We need common sense. It's interesting for a Torah scholar. A Torah scholar is someone who the 4 books of Shulchan Aruch, of the Code of Jewish Law, they know. They know well. That's what a Rav is. I know parts of it. I don't know it all fully. So I serve as not as a Rav in all areas of Jewish law, because I'm not proficient in all areas of Jewish law, but someone who is very proficient in all areas of Jewish law. So special a title of a Rav and a court of Jewish law in different areas and so on. But there is a 5th book. It's called the fifth Chelek, the 5th volume of Jewish law. You know what that is? It's called Common Sense. You might know all of Jewish law, but how to apply it in a particular instance takes common sense. You can't take Jewish law with one stroke of the brush, paint everybody, and put them in the same box in its application. You need to know the nuance on how to answer the person, not just answer the question. And that takes a sensitivity of understanding where that person is coming from. It's like the rabbi, person came to the rabbi, says, Rabbi, are you allowed to, on Passover by the Seder, are you allowed to use milk for the 4 cups? So the rabbi gave him a lot of money and said, here, go and buy yourself 4 cups of wine, buy yourself everything else, all the provisions that you need for Pesach. So one of the onlookers says, why'd you give him so much money? You only need it for some wine. Well, obviously, if he wants to use milk for his 4 cups, that means he doesn't have meat either. And he probably doesn't have matzah either. Maybe he just asked the question in such a way because he didn't want to embarrass himself and that he doesn't have any provisions for Pesach. So in answering a question, we need to know where a person is coming from. In responding to an individual, we need to know what the situation is. And therefore, we need to know how to answer with that sensitivity. So this fifth book, shall we say, of common sense that needs to go together with Jewish law. So, for example, when I'm speaking to another individual and I need to express, I can't express a falsehood. I need to say the truth. But I need at the same time to weigh the effectiveness of my words. If I'm going to say now the truth to this individual, and whatever the issue is, actually today it's interesting dealing with such a family conflict between siblings, and how do you express the truth? I have to weigh, is my words of truth going to be effective? Are they going to listen? If not, then don't say the truth, because it will not be accepted. That's the first point. The second point is that maybe the truth would be accepted, but not right this moment. Maybe you have to wait for the proper timing. When the person is all riled up and emotionally in despair, if you share with them a truth about them that is painful about them, they won't be ready. But maybe when they've calmed down at another instance, then you could share that truth that is important for you to share about them, whatever it is. So timing. If the way, is a person ready for this? Secondly, is the timing right? And then there's a third point. Maybe I'm not the right messenger for this teachings, for this truth about this person. Maybe this person is going to perceive me as I'm coming as with long nails to scratch them, to hurt them, even though maybe I'm not coming that way at all, but they're going to perceive me that way. And if they perceive me that way, therefore the message will get lost. Maybe the message is better through someone else, not me. So I shouldn't share it. There's a great gift of silence. It's extolled very much by the sages. How do we balance these things? How do we weigh these things? So what's important is to note that truth and sensitivity are not mutually exclusive from each other. They're not mutually exclusive. Unfortunately, we live in Western society that it seems to be mutually exclusive. If we see what's going on in the political arena, it seems to be mutually exclusive, but they're not. Compassion and honesty are not mutually exclusive. They can go hand in hand. You don't have to say the honest truth with brute force. It can be delivered with compassion. These are lofty ideals that we are capable of reaching. How could we get there? It's only one way. If it's about me, then I'm going to give it like it is. But if it's not about me, it's about the duty that I have, that I'm here to serve, then I'll be able to do it say the truth, and yet be compassionate, to be able to be totally honest, and yet at the same time be totally sensitive, because it's not about me delivering the message. It's not about me and my self-expression. It's not about me and what I have to get off my chest. And that's what the Rebbe would often use the words betoikef hamasim or bedarkinoyim. You could say something with an appropriate force, but in a pleasant manner. So it doesn't mean you water down your sentiment, your values, what you believe, but it's done in a pleasant manner. This is very important. One of the ways that it will be expressed is in the very fact that when you say it, when you find yourself often repeating yourself to make the point, then it's about you making your point, and you've lost sensitivity. Say it once, and let go, and let God make the space for that individual. Say it clearly, whatever needs to be said. If you find yourself, you're constantly reiterating it and over saying in order that, why? Because you're trying to control that person is being hit over the head and getting your point. So it's all about you. It's about your truth and not about any compassion or sensitivity that you have to the other. I'm sure we've all been abused that way by people in our lives, right? And perhaps we've done it too. Perhaps we've done it too. So there's a narrow bridge over here that we need to walk. That's not so simple. But when we have the necessary, what's called bittul, self-abnegation, that I see myself as a messenger rather than I have a message. I have a message that I have to get to you. I'm sorry. The sensitivity and the compassion will be lost. But if I merely see myself as a messenger, that's a difficult place to get to, especially if we have been wronged, if we've been hurt by somebody. All right, with this, let's return to our original question. We asked the question, if we need to have this sensitivity, then why is the Torah saying the word tameh over 100 times? Impure, impure, impure. Be sensitive to those animals. And it's not about the animals, obviously. It's about our language, right? They don't get the difference. So the difference is because in Torah, there are two basic things, basic shall we say, parameters or general categories, and that is there's the stories of the Torah and the law of the Torah. When it comes to the law, so there the Torah tells us, be very clear and to the point. Don't say something in a long-winded way when it comes to Jewish law. Be brief and to the point, and most importantly, that there will not be ambiguity. There'll be great clarity. So when it comes to Jewish law, if it's not kosher, say it's treif, it's impure, it's wrong when it comes to Jewish law. Because if you're going to say, for example, it's not kosher, So maybe the recipient only heard the words kosher, and it's not. Impure, clear, and precise when it comes to Jewish law. So most of the books of after the storyline of the book of Bereshit, Genesis, and parts of Shmos, then Jewish law kicks in, and most of the rest of Torah, even though the storylines there too, are about Jewish law. So they're very clear and precise. However, when it comes to the story of Torah, which is in our Parsha, the book of Noach, that there is no laws that are being told in the storyline, in this part at least, then the Torah is there to teach us a lesson. The stories are there as a guide in our lives. And what is to guide us on what it means to be human, to communicate. Communicate is about connecting to another. Another means that you recognize otherness, not my need to embrace them, smother them with love, or to give it to them when they need to be given because it's all about me. Communication means recognizing otherness and making that space. And therefore, the Torah in our Parsha is telling us and this is what the Rebbe explains in the Sikha. The explanation: when dealing with language that comes in a halachic context, then the ruling must be verbalized in the clearest words, even if the words are of a crude nature, so that the halachic decision will be crystal clear. Is that crystal clear? Yes? Leslie? Yeah? All right. Beautiful. Okay. However, that's when it comes to something, your 3-year-old child or grandchild is playing with a knife. So don't start philosophizing with the child now. I don't know. Maybe it's not such a good idea. Maybe you should, reconsider, knives are, they could. No. You just take away that knife, or you just scream at the kid because you see that they're taking it towards him, and you God forbid they're going to hurt themselves. Crystal clear. Move your hand from the oven. You're going to burn your hand. Very clear. But that's when it comes to something that needs to be crystal clear, because it comes to an action that we want to make sure that the action is done appropriately. So when it comes to Jewish law, or the child playing with a knife, and the like, crystal clear. But most of our communication is not that way. Most of our communication is connecting with another. And therefore, we have to be careful. Very interesting. In Hebrew, the word hospital is expressed in 2 ways: Beit Cholim and Beit Refuah, a house of the sick and a house of healing. How should we call it? This is where the sick people go. That definitely is helping them to remain sick. At least, obviously, that's not the intention. But just the very words have an impact. And as we know today in health, that placebo is 30% of healing. Meaning, what you think, the words that you tell yourself is important. So you go into a hospital? So you're going to a place of sick people? Or you're going for a place of healing? Place of healing means there's hope. That's what that signifies. That's what is telling us, as opposed to place of sick people. Now, of course, they're going to do the same procedure there. God forbid, it's called in such a manner. Don't think that anybody is there out to do any harm. Opposite, obviously. But this is just to bring out the point of the nuance of words on how important that they are. I remember very clearly Rabbi J.J. Hecht, Olav Shalom, used to take care of the Lag Bomer parades in 770. The Rebbe come out to the parades, and thousands of children would come. And one year he was very anxious and he was very concerned that it was just going to be a great failure. There were not going to be enough kids, and the program is going to be not such a great program. And he was very anxious until the Rebbe came out. And the Rebbe spoke to the children and spoke to everybody, and the smiles and the exuberance of the Rebbe. And when that happened, he just like, oh, relief. And afterwards he said, Rebbe, did you enjoy the parade? He says, yes, very much, thank you. He says, Rebbe, thank you. And he said to the Rebbe, you pulled me out. And the Rebbe smiled at him and says, Ausgeschleppt, aufgeheben. The Rebbe said to him, I dragged you out? No, I uplifted you. Here in just a couple of words, what the Rebbe teaches us. He was being thankful to the Rebbe. He felt that he was in an anxious place, that he felt, inside terrible. And with the Rebbe coming out and, a righteous man dealing with the kids and with everybody, everything went so beautiful, so wonderful. So Rebbe, you saved the day, because without you, I'd still be in my, deep-seated, emotional anxiety. I said, but that's not what I did. I didn't take you out of, I only uplifted you, which is a different connotation than taking you out of a bad place. Taking you out of a bad place, it's about bringing you to a good place. And that's what I helped you, to bring you to, uplift you into a good place. And with this, we see in an amazing way that the Rebbe's attitude, this on how to deal this is in the early 80s, and this is what the Rebbe writes to a person in the health profession. He says, with regard to Jewish retarded people, because this person was dealing with Jewish, right? Parenthetically, I prefer some such term as special people, not simply as a euphemism, but because it would be more accurately reflect their situation, especially in view of the fact that in many cases, the retardation is limited to the capacity to absorb and assimilate knowledge, while in other areas they may be quite normal or even above average. The Jewish identity factor is even more important, not only per se, but also for its therapeutic value. Oh my gosh. At this time, by the way, for those who are in the health profession, it was only after somewhere in the early 80s, mid 80s, that they started to use as a euphemism a positive terminology on how to deal with, instead of retardation, right, handicap. Here the Rebbe predated all of this. Actually, in 1976, when there was a group of handicapped soldiers that came to the Rebbe, who missing limbs, missing war veterans who fought. And the Rebbe spoke to them. And the Rebbe smiled. And you can see this. I don't have the video here to show you now, but you can see this. The Rebbe smiles and says, Jews always mind other Jews' business. And he says, they were called Nechei Yisrael, which means the disabled of Israel. 1976, that was normal. The Rebbe said, I don't think you should be called Nechei Yisrael. I think you should be called Mitzuyani Yisrael, the special ones of Israel. Now, as we just saw from this letter, explaining more about what happened 5 years earlier, and the Rebbe said this to these soldiers, because Mitzuyani means you're special. Not special because, we got to look at you, special because, if you lost a limb, so we have to have compassion. No, the Rebbe says it's not a euphemism. And it's not just because they're special because they were there to protect Jewish lives. And therefore, because of that, they're so special, even though they lost a limb. No, the fact that they lost a limb means that God has given them special powers above and beyond to, so to speak, balance off the lack that they have in that missing limb. So they are very special. So instead of looking at what they're missing, look at what extra they have. And maybe with this, then we can understand the best way that we can deal with other people. Instead of seeing when they've done something wrong, what they're lacking, what they're missing, the refinement comes to such a level that you can see the positive in them. That they're mitzuyane. They're disabled. What do you mean? They're missing a limb. Come on, get a life. Be real. Yeah. That's what you could see. Or you could see how they are mitzuyan, that they're extraordinary and special. The same thing is with that individual, that they are extraordinary. They're missing something. But the fact that they're missing that must mean that they have a capacity somewhere within them that is extraordinary. Tap into that in them. That's not so easy. That is even a greater refinement on everything that we've spoken about till now. Till now, we said deal with whatever negativity in a refined manner. You have to say the truth, but say it refined. Now, this is taking it to a different level. Be able to find in them, with their lack, what they're missing, mitzuyan, something special, and focusing on that. And when you're focusing on that, you know what you're going to find? Something very deep and profound and special. Not so easy. But that's who we are. And that's what the Torah teaches us. This is what we can truly get to. And this is this week's Parsha. All right, folks. It's been a pleasure. It's great to be back. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
A good Chodesh, everybody.
Good Chodesh.
God bless you all. Be well. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.